Hagrid was born on December 6, 1928, over 60 years ago now, in a tiny cottage on the edge of a village in the West Country, not far from the Forest of Dean. His father was a wizard, a small man in stature, by all accounts, but with a generous heart. His mother was none other than a giantess named Fridwulfa. Yes, a full-blooded giant. It's an unusual union, to say the least. Giants live far from us, in remote mountain clans, often brutal and solitary. But for a time, Fridwulfa lived among humans. Perhaps she wanted a life away from the violence of giant clans. Perhaps she simply found a man who wasn't afraid of her size. Whatever the case, she and Hagrid's father made a home together and had a child, a half-giant son, little Rubeus. I say little, but the truth is he was never particularly little. By the time he was a toddler, he was noticeably large and strong for his age. Still, he was their beloved child. Unfortunately, giants are not made for quiet cottage life. When Hagrid was around 3 years old, Fridwulfa left the family. One day she was simply gone, back to the Giants' Mountains without so much as a goodbye. I doubt Hagrid even remembers her clearly. He was too young. And his father, well, his father was left heartbroken, raising a boy who was growing bigger and stronger and more magically talented by the day. But raise him he did. Mr. Hagrid never spoke an unkind word about Fridwulfa in front of young Rubeus. He poured all the love he had into that child. Picture it, a wizard of modest magic and modest means, trying to keep up with a son who by the age of 6 could lift him up onto the top of a dresser as a prank. Hagrid told me once that by the time he was about that age he was actually taller than his dad and strong as an ox. They would laugh about it, the tiny father and the towering little boy making the best of a strange situation. There wasn't much money, and certainly no mother's touch, but there was love in that cottage. I sometimes wonder how isolated Hagrid must have felt even as a child. A half-giant boy in a human village that couldn't have been easy. The local Muggle children must have been frightened or mean if they encountered him at all. And in the wizarding community, well, there weren't exactly any other half-giants around to play with. His father did what he could to give him a normal childhood, but there are stories I've heard that young Hagrid accidentally broke down a door during a tantrum once, or that he snapped the head off a broomstick toy because he didn't know his own strength. Little incidents that set him apart and likely kept other families wary. So it was mostly just father and son. Hagrid learned a bit of magic at home. His father could levitate a teacup or mend a torn shirt, and he taught Rubeus those simple spells. But more importantly, he taught him kindness. He taught him to care for living things. They kept an old hunting hound and several chickens, and Hagrid, even as a boy, loved tending to them. I suspect that was where his love of creatures began, helping his dad feed the chickens and patch up the hound's scraped paw when he was 5 or 6. When Hagrid turned 11, a letter arrived that changed his life. An acceptance to Hogwarts. It was the summer of 1940. Imagine that moment, a boy who had grown up feeling different, even unsure if he'd be considered a proper wizard because of his giant blood, finding out he would indeed go to Hogwarts like any other magical child. His father was over the moon. Hagrid told me once that his dad was dead chuffed to see me go, if I recall his words. His father had worried, you see, worried that maybe Hagrid wouldn't have magic at all, that the giant heritage might overshadow it. But there was no question, the Hogwarts letter came, and off Hagrid went on the train, just like you all did, a giant of a lad crammed into a compartment built for much smaller folk. It was 1940 during the thick of a great Muggle war, though of course Hagrid at 11 would have been more focused on the adventure ahead than on world events. He arrived at Hogwarts wide-eyed and excited, towering over most of the other first years, even though he was a year or two older than some. His birthday being in December meant he started a bit later, turning 12 soon after term began. The sorting hat barely touched his head before it cried out Gryffindor, and rightly so. Even then he was brave and full of loyalty, with perhaps a tendency toward bold and reckless decisions. All qualities Gryffindor house prizes, as you know. Now, I wasn't at Hogwarts yet in those days. I myself didn't begin as a student until a few years later. But some of the professors who taught Hagrid would still be around by the time I came along, and I heard plenty of stories about him. He made an impression from the start. For one thing, young Hagrid was, how shall I put it, a bit of a walking catastrophe in the castle halls. He was so big and not entirely in control of his strength. He knocked over suits of armor almost daily. He accidentally broke the leg off a wooden desk chair first week of classes just by sitting on it. He was forever apologizing for something, spilling ink all over his classmates' homework because his elbow caught a bottle, or tripping over his own enormous feet and crashing into a bookshelf. Some students laughed at him for these things. I suspect a few older Slytherins gave him a rather hard time. You know how children can be when someone stands out. A half-giant was an easy target for unkind whispers about odd blood or oafish manners. But there was another side to him that won people over. Even then, he was kind, ridiculously kind, to hear Albus Dumbledore tell it. Hagrid might have been an awkward, oversized boy, but he had a way of befriending anyone who looked past his appearance. He would carry first year's trunks up the staircases for them, just hoist the trunks under those long arms and lug them all the way to Gryffindor Tower if he saw a smaller student struggling. He shared whatever treats he had with homesick classmates, and he had a disarming, booming laugh that could fill a room. It was hard to be frightened of him for long if you talked with him. His heart was simply on his sleeve. And creatures. Merlin's beard, did that boy love magical creatures? Not the pretty, easy ones, mind you, not kittens or owls. No, Hagrid was drawn to the creatures that others shunned or found dangerous. By his second year at school, he was sneaking out into the edges of the Forbidden Forest to visit the Thestrals that lived there, bringing them scraps of meat from the dinner table because he worried the poor things might be hungry. Now, I shouldn't have to remind you, but only someone who has witnessed death can see Thestrals. Hagrid could see them. He'd lost his mother from his life, and more recently, he'd lost his father. Yes, his father. That part of the story is terribly sad. Hagrid's father passed away during Hagrid's second year at Hogwarts, around 1942. Hagrid was just 13. He was essentially orphaned, with no mother to return to and now no father either. I'm told Professor Dumbledore, he was not headmaster yet then, just the Transfiguration teacher, broke the news to Hagrid and sat with him through that grief. Hagrid rarely talks about that time, but imagine it if you can. A young boy, already so different and isolated, suddenly without the one person who loved him unconditionally. It's no wonder Hagrid clung to whatever gave him comfort after that. For some, comfort might have been friends or studies. For Hagrid, it was caring for living things, especially magical creatures. In those difficult months after his father's death, he spent more time in the greenhouses and around the school grounds than in the common room. He found some solace tending the school pumpkins in the patch or sneaking scraps to an old hippogriff kept by the gamekeeper at the time. Unfortunately, Hagrid's love for creatures, particularly dangerous creatures, soon led him into trouble that would change his life forever. In his third year, something terrible happened at Hogwarts. You've all heard of it. The Chamber of Secrets was opened. A monster was unleashed in the castle and students were being petrified. The school was in a panic. Nobody knew who or what was attacking the students. Fear and suspicion pervaded the corridors. And then in June of 1943, a student was killed. Myrtle Warren, poor moaning Myrtle, who still haunts a bathroom on the second floor, was found dead. The situation was dire. The headmaster, Armando Dippet, was close to closing the school. Now, one of the older students at that time was a fifth-year prefect named Tom Riddle. Yes, that Tom Riddle, though of course no one knew then what he would become. Riddle was well liked by staff, a model student on the surface, clever, handsome, charming, headboy material. When Myrtle was killed, Riddle took it upon himself to assist in the investigation. Professors were searching in vain for clues, and here was this brilliant prefect offering to help. And help he did, or so it appeared. Tom Riddle found what he claimed was the cause of the attacks. He caught a younger student, Rubeus Hagrid, down in the dungeons with a creature, an acromantula, a giant spider that Hagrid had been secretly raising. Riddle reported that Hagrid's spider, that monster, was responsible for killing Myrtle and attacking the others. Can you imagine it? Think of Hagrid at 13, grief-stricken over his father's death just months before, terribly alone, and then suddenly accused of being behind a classmate's death. The truth, which only became clear decades later, is that Tom Riddle himself was the one who had unleashed the true monster. a basilisk from the Chamber of Secrets. Riddle framed Hagrid as a convenient scapegoat. After all, who would people believe? The charismatic prefect with top marks or the oversized, awkward third year who kept a pet spider and had trouble speaking clearly when he was upset? Hagrid was different. He was an easy target for fear and prejudice, and Riddle was cunning. He knew exactly how to spin the story. The authorities accepted Tom Riddle's version. The Ministry of Magic dispatched officials to the school.